The night was unusually quiet in the city, the kind of silence that felt deceptive, as though danger was hiding in the hum of servers, in the unseen flow of data traveling across the globe. Miles Carter sat in the glow of 3 monitors, his face lit by shifting lines of code, his hands steady on the keyboard. For years, Miles had lived in shadows. Not the kind you find in alleys, but in the digital spaces where morality was blurred, and a man's worth was measured by how deep into a network he could crawl without being detected. He was once one of the most feared black hat hackers on the dark web, known for building some of the most destructive ransomware strains corporations had ever faced. They whispered his alias, Spectre, in fear because his code could bring empires to their knees overnight. But tonight, Miles was not writing code for destruction. He was staring at a set of encrypted files, locked away by a ransomware attack he had launched, but which carried his signature. Someone had stolen his old tools, his legacy of chaos, and used them to destroy lives in a way that even he, in his darkest years, had never intended. Hospitals had gone offline. Patient records were frozen. Surgeries delayed. A child had died because the machines were locked mid-operation. For Miles, who had sworn off his past 3 years ago after his sister died of a preventable illness in a hospital too slow to access its own systems, this was not just theft. It was desecration. The redemption he sought didn't come from the law. The FBI had tried to recruit him before, thinking he could be turned into an informant, but he'd walked away from that. Redemption, for Miles, was personal. It came from using the very darkness he had once thrived in to dismantle the evil born from it. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing at the data trail. Whoever had taken his old framework was clever, masking their traces through botnets across 6 continents, spinning decoys like spider silk. But Miles had written this code, and no one knew its quirks better than he did. A misplaced semicolon, a redundant loop, tiny flaws that revealed themselves like breadcrumbs only to their creator. Hours bled into days as Miles traced the infection path. Coffee cups stacked on the desk, his phone went unanswered, and the blinds stayed shut. The attacker called themselves Nemesis, and they had left taunting notes in every ransom demand, boasting about bringing systems to their knees. But Miles knew arrogance when he saw it. Nemesis was talented, but reckless. And recklessness leaves cracks. The final breakthrough came at dawn on the 4th day, when Miles caught a command and control server pinging at an interval just 1 second off from his original design. That single tick, almost imperceptible, was enough. He dug deeper, peeling back the layers of obfuscation until an IP address flickered on his screen, hidden behind proxies, but not perfectly. His pulse quickened. He knew where Nemesis was. The city on the other end of the line was quiet, small, unremarkable. A rented apartment became the nest for this predator, and from the digital window into that machine, Miles saw fragments of who Nemesis was. A man barely in his 20s, reckless, unafraid, his chat logs bragging about the millions he expected from hospitals and universities. The arrogance confirmed what Miles already knew. Nemesis wasn't just in it for money. He wanted recognition, the kind of infamy Spectre once carried. Miles could have destroyed him right then, wiped the servers, deleted the code, erased Nemesis from the web. But that wasn't enough. Redemption wasn't just about stopping a criminal, it was about undoing the harm. He worked tirelessly to reverse-engineer the ransomware, to create a universal key that would unlock every infected machine. It was like disarming a bomb wired into thousands of lives, each second ticking with consequence. The code resisted him, snarling back with traps and countermeasures, but slowly, one barrier after another fell. His fingers trembled as he tested the key on a small subset of files. The lock opened. Data returned. By the end of the week, the decryption key was in the hands of cybersecurity teams across the globe, hospitals were restoring their systems, and families were reunited with the digital lifelines Nemesis had threatened to take away. Miles didn't ask for credit. He released the key anonymously, just as Nemesis had once released the infection. Balance restored, in his own way. But Miles wasn't done. The final step in his redemption came when he planted a trap in Nemesis's own system, embedding code so subtle that even a seasoned hacker might not notice it. Nemesis, drunk on his own success, logged in as usual, unaware of the invisible strings tightening around him. When law enforcement burst through his door 2 weeks later, dragging him into custody, Nemesis never knew that it wasn't just the FBI who had found him, it was the ghost of Spectre, settling debts in silence. Miles watched the news that night, the glow of the TV casting long shadows across his small apartment. Nemesis's arrest was hailed as a major victory, though no one knew the truth of how it had been engineered. Miles leaned back in his chair, exhaustion tugging at his bones, and for the first time in years, he felt something close to peace. He would never erase what he had done in the past, never bring back the trust he had broken or the lives his code had ruined. But he had written a different ending this time. The tools he once wielded for destruction had become weapons of salvation. The world would never know the story of Spectre's redemption. But that was fine. Some victories, he thought, weren't meant to be celebrated. They were meant to be carried quietly, like scars, reminders of the battles you fought not just against others, but against yourself. And as the city stirred awake beyond his window, Miles Carter closed his laptop, shut his eyes, and allowed the silence to settle once again. The silence didn't last long. Miles knew it never did. Shadows had a way of following him, no matter how many fires he put out. Days after Nemesis was arrested, whispers began appearing in the darker corners of the web. Hackers were angry, not at Nemesis's fall, but at the fact that someone had dismantled his ransomware empire with surgical precision. They were paranoid, restless, searching for the ghost in their midst. Some claimed it was the government. Others believed it was a rival group making a power move. A few old-timers, though, remembered a name long thought to be gone: Spectre. Miles read those whispers with a chill running down his spine. He had never wanted to wear that name again, but it clung to him like smoke to a burned house. Nemesis's failure was only a spark in a wider war. There were others out there, bigger, more ruthless, with no hesitation to cripple entire cities for profit or ideology. What he had just undone was only one infection in a vast, diseased system. He told himself he was done, that the key had been his redemption, that he had settled the balance. Yet, as the days slipped by, he found himself staring at the glow of his monitors late into the night, scanning forums, reading encrypted chatter, mapping new attacks as they began. Each keystroke was a step backward into a life he had promised himself he'd left behind. But the pull was undeniable. One evening, a new thread appeared on a black hat marketplace, one that made his heart sink. It wasn't just about hospitals this time, it was about power grids. Someone was developing ransomware specifically to target energy systems, with the potential to plunge millions into darkness. The alias attached to it wasn't Nemesis. It was worse. It was Vortex, a name Miles knew too well. Vortex had once been his partner. Together, they had written code that terrified corporations worldwide. But unlike Miles, Vortex never questioned the consequences. To him, chaos wasn't a byproduct, it was the goal. When Miles had disappeared from that world years ago, he thought he had left Vortex behind. But now, here he was, preparing to weaponize the same kind of destruction that had once haunted Miles's conscience. For the first time in years, Miles felt fear. Not for himself, but for what was coming. Redemption, he realized, was not a destination. It was a war he'd have to fight over and over again, each victory a fragile shield against the weight of his past. He closed his eyes, leaning back in his chair, as the hum of his servers filled the room like a heartbeat. He could walk away. He could pretend none of it mattered. But deep down, he knew the truth. The world didn't need Spectre. But the world was going to get him anyway. And this time, it wouldn't be about redemption alone. It would be about reckoning.